When I was on a business trip, my greedy husband sold my dream car and spent all the money on gambling, losing everything. Upon returning, I asked him about the car, but his rude response forced me to report it to the police. However, I never expected his reaction when the police arrived. I always believed that love could survive anything: hard times, misunderstandings, even the worst of arguments. I thought that trust, once built, could never be broken. But I was wrong. Some betrayals cut so deep that no amount of love can heal them. My name is Sophia Carter, and this is my story. For the past year, I thought I had the perfect life. I was 29, a successful businesswoman in New York City, married to the man I loved, Daniel Carter. We had been together for 3 years before we got married, and during those years, he was everything I ever wanted. Kind, charming, supportive. He made me feel like I was the most important person in his life. At first, our marriage was wonderful. I worked hard, climbing a ladder in my company, and Daniel had a stable job as a sales executive. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. I even bought my dream car, a luxury sports car that I had worked years to afford. It wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of my success, my independence, my journey from struggling to thriving. But 1 month ago, everything started to change. Daniel came home one evening looking frustrated, tossing his briefcase onto the couch. When I asked what was wrong, he told me he had quit his job. Just like that. No warning, no discussion. He claimed his boss had it out for him, that his colleagues were jealous of his success. At first, I believed him. I comforted him, telling him we'd figure things out together. But something felt off. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel made no effort to find another job. Instead, he stayed out late, disappearing for hours without telling me where he was. When I asked, he snapped at me, saying I was acting like his mother. It wasn't like him to be so short-tempered. He used to tell me everything, but now he avoided my questions, changing the subject every time I asked about money. The late nights turned into entire weekends. He would leave on a Friday evening and return Sunday morning, reeking of alcohol, his clothes wrinkled like he had slept in them. The first few times, I told myself he was just blowing off steam. But then, he started asking me for money. "Just a little, Sophia. I'll pay you back," he'd say with a sheepish smile. At first, I gave in, assuming he needed help while he looked for a new job. But soon, a little turned into larger amounts. When I refused, he'd get defensive. "I'm your husband. Why are you acting like I'm some strangers?" Then came the lies. I caught him sneaking into my wallet, making excuses for missing money. My best friend, Emma, noticed it too. One evening, as we sipped coffee at our favorite cafe, she gave me a concerned look. "Sophia, you need to wake up. Daniel isn't acting like a man who just lost his job. He's hiding something." I didn't want to hear it. I still wanted to believe that he was just going through a tough time. But deep down, I knew Emma was right. Then came the moment that shattered everything. I had to travel for a business trip, 1 week in London for an important conference. Before I left, I made sure everything at home was in order. I even parked my sports car in the garage, knowing how much it meant to me. But when I returned, something was wrong. I walked into the apartment, exhausted from the flight, expecting to see Daniel. Instead, the place was empty. No note, no call, nothing. And then I looked outside. My car was gone. Panic surged through me. I checked my phone, thinking maybe I had missed a message from Daniel, but there was nothing. I grabbed my keys and rushed downstairs to the building security. "Did you see my car?" I asked breathlessly. The guard hesitated. Yeah, Mrs. Carter. Your husband took it a few days ago." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "Are you sure?" "Yes. He said you knew about it." I didn't know whether to scream or cry. I tried calling Daniel, no answer. Text after text, nothing. Hours passed before he finally walked through the door, looking completely unconcerned. "Where's my car, Daniel?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He gave me a lazy shrug. "Relax, Sophie. It's just a car. Probably got stolen while I was out." I stared at him, disbelief turning into rage. "What do you mean, stolen? Where were you?" He sighed, rubbing his face like I was the one being unreasonable. Look, I went out with some friends. Maybe I forgot to lock it. I don't know.
Lies.
More lies. I could see it in his eyes, the way he avoided looking at me. Something was terribly wrong. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. Had he really lost it? Or had he done something worse? The next morning, I reported the car missing. I had no choice. I called the police, gave them all the details, and within hours, Detective Ryan Mitchell was assigned to the case. He was a no-nonsense kind of man, the type who had seen it all. "Mrs. Carter," he said, flipping through his notepad, "are you sure your husband wasn't involved?" The question hit me like a slap. I wanted to defend Daniel, to insist he wasn't capable of something like that. But a voice in my head whispered, "Are you sure?" I don't know," I admitted quietly. As the days passed, the investigation revealed disturbing things. My car had been spotted miles away, used in illegal dealings. Someone had sold it.
Someone close to me.
And I already knew the answer before the detective even said it. Daniel. My husband. The man I trusted. The realization was like a knife through my heart. And yet, I still had no idea how much worse things were about to get. I sat in the living room, staring at my phone, waiting for the detective to call me back. My mind refused to process the truth. Daniel had stolen and sold my car. The thought made my stomach twist. How could he? After everything we had been through, after all the love and trust one had given him, how could he betray me like this? I had spent the last few days convincing myself that maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe he had made a bad decision. Maybe he was struggling more than I knew. Maybe he wasn't the man I thought he was. The phone rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. Detective Mitchell's voice was firm. "Mrs. Carter, we traced the sale of your car. Your husband sold it to a known criminal in another city. He used a fake name, but we have surveillance footage. There's no doubt it was Daniel." I closed my eyes, inhaling sharply. It was real. The man I had married had stolen from me, lied to my face, and put my name on a crime report. "Mrs. Carter," the detective said after a moment of silence. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "What happens next?" "We're issuing an arrest warrant. He committed fraud. If you have any contact with him, let us know immediately." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thank you, detective." The moment I hung up, I felt numb. I turned to see Emma standing near the kitchen, watching me carefully. She had been staying with me since the car went missing, knowing something wasn't right. "What did they say?" she asked softly. I hesitated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel sold my car. The police are arresting him." Emma's eyes darkened. "Sophia, you need to get out of this marriage." I wanted to argue, to tell her that it wasn't that simple. But deep down, I knew she was right. I just wasn't ready to accept it yet. That night, I waited for Daniel to come home. I needed answers. I needed to hear the truth from his mouth, no matter how painful it was. At around midnight, the door creaked open, and he stumbled in, his shirt wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He reeked of alcohol and cigarettes. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, arms crossed. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice cold. He looked up, blinking as if he was surprised to see me. "Out with some friends," he slurred. "Why do you care?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "You stole my car, Daniel. You sold it." For a second, there was silence. Then he scoffed, shaking his head. "Oh, come on, Sophia. Don't act like it's a big deal. It's just a car." I needed the money. Just a car. My hands clenched into fists. "You lied to me. You let me think it was stolen." He rolled his eyes, stepping past me into the kitchen. "Yeah, well, what was I supposed to do? Tell you the truth? You'd just freak out like you're doing right now." My heart pounded in my chest. "You didn't just steal my car, Daniel. You sold it to criminals. Do you even understand what you've done?" He grabbed a beer from the fridge, cracking it open with an annoyed sigh. "Oh, please. You're acting like I murdered someone." I couldn't believe the person standing in front of me was the same man I once loved. "The police know, Daniel. They have proof. They're coming for you." The beer can slipped from his hand, crashing onto the floor. His face turned pale. What? You heard me, I said, my voice steady. They know everything. You're going to jail. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Sophia, no. You have to fix this. Fix this? I let out a bitter laugh. You did this to yourself. His desperation turned to anger in a flash. You're my wife. You're supposed to stand by me, not turn me in. I stepped back, shaking my head. I stood by you when you lost your job. I stood by you when you started acting strange. I stood by you when you lied to my face. But this is unforgivable. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. Okay. Look, I messed up. But I can fix it. I just need more time. No, I said firmly. I'm done. His eyes snapped to mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw something dark flicker across his face. Then he dropped to his knees, grabbing my hands. Please, Sophia. Don't leave me. I love you. I need you, he begged, his voice shaking. Tears burned at the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You don't need me, Daniel. You need help. And I'm not going to destroy myself trying to save you. The sound of sirens filled the air. A knock came at the door. Detective Mitchell's voice was calm but firm. Mr. Carter, we have a warrant for your arrest. Open the door. Daniel's grip on my hands tightened for a second before he let go. He looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Anger, regret, maybe even hatred. Then he stood up and walked to the door. The moment the officers took him away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: pain, relief, heartbreak. Emma placed a hand on my shoulder. It's over, Sophia. I shook my head.
No.
It's just the beginning. Because now, I had to figure out how to rebuild my life from the ruins Daniel had left behind. And for the first time, I realized I could do it without him. The night after Daniel was arrested, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The apartment felt emptier than ever, but at the same time, I could finally breathe. For the first time in months, I didn't have to worry about where he was or what lie he was going to tell me next. But that didn't mean the pain had disappeared. It was still there, sitting heavy on my chest, reminding me of everything I had lost. Not just my car, not just my marriage, but the illusion of the man I had once believed in. The next morning, Emma insisted on coming over. She brought coffee and breakfast, even though I barely had the appetite to eat. We sat at the dining table, the silence between us stretching until she finally spoke. So, what now? I took a deep breath. I don't know. You do know, she said, watching me closely. You just don't want to say it. I set my coffee down and met her gaze. I need to leave him. Emma nodded but didn't say, I told you so, even though she had been warning me for months. Instead, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're doing the right thing. It should have felt like relief to say it out loud, to finally admit that this marriage was beyond saving. But all I felt was exhaustion. I had spent so much time trying to convince myself that Daniel would change, that if I just loved him enough, he would snap out of whatever dark path he was on. But love wasn't enough. Love couldn't fix a man who didn't want to be fixed. I spent the rest of the day making phone calls. First, to a lawyer. Emma had recommended someone from her firm who specialized in divorce cases. Then, to my parents. I had been avoiding telling them the truth for weeks, ashamed of how far things had spiraled. My mother answered on the first ring. Sophia.
We've been so worried about you.
I swallowed hard. Mom. Daniel was arrested last night. The line went silent. Then, she spoke again, her voice careful. What happened? I told her everything. The job loss, the gambling, the stolen car, the lies. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking. My mother sighed, and when she spoke again, I could hear the pain in her voice.
Oh, sweetheart.
You didn't deserve this. I closed my eyes, trying to fight back the tears. I'm filing for divorce. This time, she didn't hesitate.
Good.
It's time to put yourself first. My father got on the line then, his voice gruff but full of concern. You need anything, you call us. Don't try to handle this alone. I promised them I would be okay. even though I wasn't sure I believed it yet. 2 days later, I went to the courthouse to officially file the papers. As I handed them to the clerk, a strange sense of finality settled over me. This was it. The end of my marriage. The end of everything I had once dreamed of with Daniel. But it was also the beginning of something else, something that felt a lot like freedom. Later that evening, I sat in my apartment, sipping a glass of wine, when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello, Sophia." My stomach twisted at the sound of his voice. "Daniel." There was silence on the other end. Then he spoke again, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "I messed up. I know I did." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. "I need you to help me," he continued. "Please, Sophia. I have no one else." A part of me wanted to feel sorry for him. To believe, for just a second, that he truly regretted everything. But I had spent too long making excuses for him. "You made your choices, Daniel," I said quietly. "And now you have to live with them." His voice turned desperate. "So that's it? You're just going to walk away?" I closed my eyes. "Yes." He exhaled sharply, and for a moment, I thought he might beg again. But then his tone changed. "You think you're better than me now, don't you?" I gripped the phone tighter. "I think I deserve better than this." A bitter laugh came through the line. "You'll regret this, Sophia." I hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, waiting to feel afraid. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone make me feel small again. The divorce process moved faster than I expected. Maybe because Daniel didn't fight it, he knew he had no ground to stand on. Or maybe because I had finally stopped looking for reasons to hold on. Either way, within a few months, I was legally free. But freedom, I learned, doesn't come all at once. It creeps in little by little until one day, you wake up and realize the weight you've been carrying is gone. For weeks after our final court date, I kept expecting to feel grief, to miss the good parts of what we had. But the truth was, the man I had loved hadn't existed in a long time. Maybe he never had. One evening, Emma came over with a bottle of champagne, insisting we celebrate. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. I clinked mine against hers, taking a sip. The bubbles fizzed against my tongue, light and sharp. "To never settling for less again." She grinned. "Now that's the energy I like to hear." I had spent so long defining myself by my relationship, by the idea of being someone's wife, someone's partner. But for the first time in years, I was just Sophia. And I was starting to realize that was enough. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects, traveling more. I even booked a solo trip to Europe, something I had always dreamed of, but never allowed myself to do. And while I was in Italy, standing on a quiet balcony overlooking the sea, I felt it, peace. Not just the absence of pain, but the presence of something else. Hope. But the past has a way of creeping back in when you least expect it. One afternoon, months after my divorce was finalized, I got a call from Detective Mitchell. "I thought you'd want to know. Daniel was released on bail." I sat up straighter. "What does that mean for me?" "Legally? Nothing. But you should be aware that he's out." I thanked him and hung up, my heart pounding. I told myself I had nothing to worry about. Daniel had no reason to come back into my life. I was wrong. That night, as I was walking back to my apartment from dinner with Emma, I spotted someone leaning against the building entrance. Even in the dim light, I knew who it was. Daniel. For a brief second, I considered turning around, walking the other way. But I was done running. I stopped a few feet away, my voice steady. "What do you want?" He looked different, thinner, older, like the months in jail had drained the life out of him. "I just wanted to talk," he said. I thought maybe. There's nothing left to say. He let out a slow breath. "I've lost everything, Sophia." I crossed my arms. "That's not my problem." A flicker of anger crossed his face, but he swallowed it down. "You really don't care, do you?" I met his eyes, unflinching. "Not anymore." For a moment, he just stared at me, as if searching for something, weakness, regret, anything he could use. But there was nothing left to give him. He shook his head, shoving his hands into his pockets. Guess you got what you wanted. I tilted my head. And what's that? He gave a bitter smile. Your freedom. I nodded. Yes, I did. And I'm never giving it up again. He scoffed but didn't argue. Maybe he finally understood that there was nothing left between us. No second chances, no lingering love. Just the cold, hard truth I had moved on. He turned to leave, pausing only once. Take care, Sophia. I watched him walk away, disappearing into the city streets, and I knew it was the last time I would ever see him. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring out the window, the city lights stretching endlessly before me. I thought about everything I had been through, everything I had survived. And then I smiled, because for the first time in a long, long time, my life was mine again.